Don't worry, John Roberts. You've got plenty of time.
Figured you were waiting for me.
Waiting for you. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to bring up National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster and Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin to discuss the administration's response to the Maduro regime's recent anti-democratic actions in Venezuela. They will each make opening remarks and then take your questions on the topic at hand. And then, as always, your favorite time of day, I'll come back up and take your questions. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I thought it might be best just to read the president's statement. Since President Trump's inauguration, the Trump administration has called on Venezuela's Maduro regime to respect Venezuela's constitution, respect the role and authorities of the constitutionally established National Assembly, hold free and fair elections, address the humanitarian needs of the Venezuelan people, release political prisoners, and stop oppressing its great people. The regime has refused to heed this call, and its recent actions, culminating in yesterday's outrageous seizure of absolute power through the sham election of the National Constituent Assembly, represent a very serious blow to democracy in our hemisphere. Maduro is not just a bad leader, he is now a dictator. The United States stands with the people of Venezuela in the face of this oppression. We will work with our partners to hold accountable all those responsible for the escalating violence and ongoing human rights violations. The president promised strong and swift actions if the regime went forward with imposing the National Constituent Assembly on the Venezuelan people, and he will keep that promise. Secretary Mnuchin.
Thank you, General. Today, the United States is broadening its effort to address the ongoing assault on Venezuela's democratic institutions by the Maduro regime. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, has sanctioned the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro Moros. As a result of today's sanctions, all assets of Maduro subject to U.S. jurisdiction are frozen, and U.S. persons are prohibited from dealing with him. As President Trump said earlier this month, the strong and courageous actions by the Venezuelan people to stand for democracy, freedom, and the rule of law have been continually ignored by Nicolas Maduro, who dreams of becoming a dictator. Yesterday's illegitimate elections confirm that Maduro is a dictator who disregards the will of the Venezuelan people. The National Constituent Assembly aspires illegitimately to usurp the constitutional role of democratically elected National Assembly, rewrite the Constitution, and impose an authoritarian regime on the people. As such, it represents a rupture in Venezuela's constitutional and democratic order. By sanctioning Maduro, the United States makes clear our opposition to the policies of his regime and the support for the people of Venezuela, who strive to return their country to a full and prosperous democracy. As the country's head of state, Maduro is directly responsible for Venezuela's descent and for the destruction of democracy. Adding Maduro to OFAC's list of specially designated national reflects our commitment to not stand by idly as Venezuela continues to crumble under the regime's abuses. We hope that these sanctions will make all Maduro regime officials reconsider how their actions have affected their country. These actions highlight the high cost and personal repercussions and enablers of this regime could face if they continue their reckless and undemocratic activities. Anyone who participates in this illegitimate ANC could be exposed to future U.S. sanctions for their role in undermining democratic process and institutions in Venezuela. Now we'll take a few questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. If these sanctions don't work, what would the next step be? And I guess, General McMaster, a question to you. Have we ruled out, or is anything on the table other than economic sanctions?
Well, let me just say, I said this generally, we very much believe that sanctions do work, and we will continue to monitor the situation and consider additional sanctions.
And to General McMaster?
The president has prioritized really his concern for the Venezuelan people. And so he's only considering those options which would benefit directly the Venezuelan people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
How many times has OPEC sanctioned a head of state before? And does Maduro have any assets in the U.S.?
I can't comment on his assets, and this will be the fourth head of state.
Mr. Secretary,
In the
Mr.
back.
Secretary, you called them.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. One on the sanctions and another one about the election yesterday. And about the election, I want to know if you see the election as an attempt by Nicolás Maduro to consolidate power and dismiss the election next year. And also, some say, especially the opposition, and also the Washington Post editorial board say that the Venezuela regime is on the direction of a coup. Is moving to the direction of a coup. Does the American government fear there is a coup underway in Venezuela? And then the question on sanctions I asked after.
Well, what we're seeing in Venezuela is not a coup. What we're seeing is the brutal oppression of the Venezuelan people. And so it's clear if you contrast the turnout from the opposition referendum to the very low numbers of the turnout during this farce associated with the Constituent Assembly, I think you see what the true desires of the Venezuelan people are.
Okay, can I go
Yeah,
ahead?
yes.
Thank you, sir. Actually, this goes to either or both of you. How is this different from what happened in Turkey when President Erdogan also seized expanded powers in a referendum that some considered to have a questionable result? President Trump congratulated President Erdogan on that, and he later came to the U.S. and his people beat protesters in front of his embassy. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, one difference is you see the end of the Constitution in Venezuela, and this is happening obviously at an accelerated pace in recent months over in the Maduro regime. But this is a process that has taken really two regimes to really restrict Venezuelan democracy, and by designating Maduro himself, he joins a very exclusive club, including Mr. Mugabe, Bashar al-Assad, and Kim Jong-un, in terms of the brutal repression of his people, and in this case the abrogation of the Constitution with the Constitution with the Assembly, Constituent Assembly.
Right here, yes.
Thank you,
Right
Mr.
here.
Secretary. Is the administration contemplating any action at the UN Security Council in terms of multilateral sanctions against the Maduro regime?
Again, I think as we've said before, this president is not going to advertise what he's going to do in the future. So all options are on the table, and we will consider everything.
And to other allies of the U.S. in terms of punishing the Maduro regime. General, can you please answer that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Have you spoken to any other American allies
Yes.
About the issue of punishing
You see in the president's statement, he said we're going to continue to work with our partners in the region, and there have been many leaders who've taken a very important role in this connection with trying to engage Maduro, to get him to moderate his behavior, to get him to protect the rights of his people. As you know, the Organization of American States has tried very hard in this area as well, and so the president is committed to working with partners in the region on behalf of the Venezuelan people.
And we had several countries last week join us in our previous sanctions. Yes, right here.
What conversations, Secretary Mnuchin, have you had, or has the administration had, or the president had with President Maduro or anybody at the senior level in Venezuela? Do you expect those conversations to happen over the next 24, 48 hours?
I think we're not going to comment on that.
Thank you, sir. You had said before, the president had promised strong and swift economic sanctions. This is not really economic, this is more individual. Will the president carry out strong and swift economic sanctions?
Again, we had a series of sanctions last week. This is an additional sanction today. We don't comment on future sanctions, but we will continue to monitor the situation and determine what's appropriate. Right here.
There was some talk of maybe making some changes in terms of our export of light crude oil to Venezuela or curbing Venezuelan oil imports. Is that still on the table, or is that something that would be seen as hurting the Venezuelan people?
Let me just say, as we continue to monitor this situation, we will continue to review all of our options. Our objective is not to do anything that hurts the people of Venezuela, but let me just say, we will continue to monitor all of our specific options.
And would sanctions against oil hurt
I'm
the
not going to
Venezuelan
comment
people?
on that. What I will say is we will monitor all of our options.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. 16 years ago, Secretary Powell signed an agreement in South America in which the U.S. completely ruled out support of coups that would have an indirect change of government throughout Latin America and supported direct succession. This occurred in Haiti when President Aristide was overthrown. Are you still abiding by the agreement Secretary Powell signed and ruling out any U.S. support of a coup or an uprising against the Maduro regime that brings in new leadership?
Again, I'm just going to comment on, we are focused on the democratic process, and that's what we're focused on right now. We'll take one more question. Right here, one more question.
Are there going to be sanctions on the Minister of Defense or people linked to the military?
Again, as I've said, we've announced